'Sarah, my dear,' returned Sampson, rubbing his hands feebly, 'you disturb our friends. Besides, you're disappointed, Sarah, and, not knowing what you say, expose yourself.' 'Yes, you pitiful dastard,' retorted the lovely damsel. 'I understand you. You feared that I should be beforehand with you. But do you think that I would have been enticed to say a word? I'd have scorned it if they had tried and tempted me for 20 years. Simpered Brass, who, in his deep debasement, really seemed to have changed sexes with his sister, and to have made over to her any spark of manliness he might have possessed. 'You think so, Sarah, you think so perhaps, but you would have acted quite different, my good fellow. You will not have forgotten that it was a maxim with Foxy, our revered father, gentlemen, always suspect everybody. That's the maxim to go through life with. If you were not actually about to purchase your own safety when I showed myself, I suspect you'd have done it by this time. And therefore I've done it myself, and spared you the trouble as well as the shame. The shame, gentlemen,' added Brass, allowing himself to be slightly overcome, 'if there is any, is mine. It's better that a female should be spared it.' With deference to the better opinion of Mr Brass, and more particularly to the authority of his great ancestor, it may be doubted, with humility, whether the elevating principle laid down by the latter gentleman, and acted upon by his descendant, is always a prudent one, or attended in practice with the desired results. This is, beyond question, a bold and presumptuous doubt, inasmuch as many distinguished characters, called men of the world, long-headed customers, knowing dogs, shrewd fellows, capital hands at business, and the like, have made, and do daily make, this axiom their polar star and compass. Still, the doubt may be gently insinuated, and in illustration it may be observed, that if Mr Brass, not being over suspicious, had, without prying and listening, left his sister to manage the conference on their joint behalf, or, prying and listening, had not been in such a mighty hurry to anticipate her, which he would not have been but for his distrust and jealousy, he would probably have found himself much better off in the end. Thus it will always happen that these men of the world, who go through it in armour, defend themselves from quite as much good as evil, to say nothing of the inconvenience and absurdity of mounting guard of the microscope at all times, and of wearing a coat of mail on the most innocent occasions. The three gentlemen spoke together apart for a few moments. At the end of their consultation, which was very brief, the notary pointed to the writing materials on the table, and informed Mr Brass that if he wished to make any statement in writing, he had the opportunity of doing so. At the same time, he felt bound to tell him that they would require his attendance presently before a justice of the peace, and that in what he did or said he was guided entirely by his own discretion. 'Gentlemen,' said Brass, drawing off his glove, and crawling in spirit upon the ground before them, 'I will justify the tenderness with which I know I shall be treated, and as, without tenderness, I should, now that this discovery has been made, stand in the worst position of the three, you may depend upon it, I will make a clean breast. Mr Witherden, sir, a kind of faintness is upon my spirits. If you would do me the favour to ring the bell and order up a glass of something warm and spicy, I shall, notwithstanding what has passed, have a melancholy pleasure in drinking your good health. I had hoped,' said Brass, looking round with a mournful smile, 'to have seen you three gentlemen, one day or another, with your legs under the mahogany in my humble parlour in the Marks. But hopes are fleeting. Dear me! Mr Brass found himself so exceedingly affected at this point that he could say or do nothing more until some refreshment arrived. Having partaken of it pretty freely for one in his agitated state, he sat down to write. The lovely Sarah, now with her arms folded and now with her hands clasped behind her, paced the room with manly strides while her brother was thus employed, and sometimes stopped to pull out her snuff-box and bite the lid. She continued to pace up and down until she was quite tired, and then fell asleep on a chair near the door. It has been since supposed, with some reason, that this slumber was a sham or feint, as she contrived to slip away unobserved in the dusk of the afternoon. Whether this was an intentional and waking departure, or a somnambulistic leave-taking and walking in her sleep, may remain a subject of contention. But, on one point, and indeed the main one, all parties are agreed. In whatever state she walked away, she certainly did not walk back again. Mention having been made of the dusk of the afternoon, it will be inferred that Mr Brass's task occupied some time in the completion. It was not finished until evening, but being done at last, that worthy person and the three friends adjourned in a hackney coach to the private office of a justice, who, giving Mr Brass a warm reception and detaining him in a secure place that he might ensure to himself the pleasure of seeing him on the morrow, dismissed the others with the cheering assurance that a warrant could not fail to be granted next day for the apprehension of Mr Quilp, and that a proper application and statement of all the circumstances to the Secretary of State, who was fortunately in town, would no doubt procure Kit's free pardon and liberation without delay. And now, indeed, it seemed that Quilp's malignant career was drawing to a close, and that retribution, which often travels slowly, especially when heaviest, had tracked his footsteps with a sure and certain scent, and was gaining on him fast. Unmindful of her stealthy tread, her victim holds his course in fancied triumph. Still at his heels she comes, and once afoot is never turned aside. Their business ended, the three gentlemen hastened back to the lodgings of Mr Swiveller, whom they found progressing so favourably in his recovery as to have been able to sit up for half an hour, and to have conversed with cheerfulness. Mrs Garland had gone home some time since, but Mr Abel was still sitting with him. After telling him all they had done, the two Mr Garlands and the single gentleman, as if by some previous understanding, took their leaves for the night, leaving the invalid alone with the notary and the small servant. 'As you are so much better,' said Mr Witherden, sitting down at the bedside, 'I may venture to communicate to you a piece of news which has come to me professionally.' The idea of any professional intelligence from a gentleman connected with legal matters appeared to afford Richard anything but a pleasing anticipation. Perhaps he connected it in his own mind with one or two outstanding accounts, in reference to which he had already received divers threatening letters. His countenance fell as he replied: 'Certainly, sir. I hope it's not anything of a very disagreeable nature, though.' 'If I thought it so, I should choose some better time for communicating it,' replied the notary. 'Let me tell you first that my friends who have been here to-day know nothing of it, and that their kindness to you has been quite spontaneous and with no hope of return. It may do a thoughtless, careless man good to know that.' Dick thanked him, and said he hoped it would. 'I've been making some inquiries about you,' said Mr Witherden, 'little thinking that I should find you under such circumstances as those which have brought us together. You are the nephew of Rebecca Swiveller, spinster, deceased, of Cheselbourne in Dorsetshire.' 'Deceased!' cried Dick. 'Deceased. If you had been another sort of nephew, you would have come into possession, so says the will, and I see no reason to doubt it, of £25,000. As it is, you have fallen into an annuity of £150 a year, but I think I may congratulate you even upon that.' 'Sir,' said Dick, sobbing and laughing together, 'you may. For, please God,